Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with knowledge partners NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, CEO of Boardroom Resources, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. We're going to be talking about what worries corporate secretaries about board performance and governance today. And who better to talk about corporate secretaries and boards than my guest, Darla Stuckey, who's the president and CEO of the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals. And Darla, it's great to see you again.
Thanks, TK. It's been too long.
It has been too long, but we've got some things to talk about today. And the first one, obviously corporate secretaries. Everybody knows that corporate secretaries are the backbone to what happens at the board. They got to orient new board members. They have to be on top of compliance and regulation. They really have a responsibility that goes way beyond just the board meetings. They're busy a lot of times, full schedules in between, but this is something I don't have to tell you, right?
Right. You know, they're also a huge information provider. They need to anticipate needs, they need to help with agenda setting, and they watch the news and they know what's going on and what's going on in the companies of the directors whom they serve, to anticipate questions that might come up as well. Lately, I would say in the last 2 or 3 years since the advent of Say on Pay, engagement has really blossomed, and I know you've talked about that, but the corporate secretaries have long been basically the brokers between some institutional investors and the board and the CEO and management on telling them what issues are important to the investors. So corporate secretaries are the ones that do talk to the voting people, I want to call them, instead of the money people. I've heard them called money people and voting people, but there are two parts to the institutional investor community. And the folks that vote have long interacted with corporate secretaries on anything on the proxy. So this would be board succession, board composition, diversity, CEO succession, separation of chair and CEO issues, certainly pay. Now, corporate secretaries aren't experts on pay necessarily, but to get the, when there's a pay problem, an institutional investor will start with the corporate secretary to get to the HR head. So basically, and then shareholder proposals, which, you know, many of those are governance related, and the, separation of chair and CEO issue bubbles up, proxy access, all bubbled up from comes from shareholder proposals. So the corporate secretaries have long been the people that own the proxy and have dealt with the shareholders in terms of what's in the proxy and what proposals are in the proxy. And their job is to explain, to the management and to the board and the Nom and Gov committees what it is that the investors expect and what they want. And I don't want to get too far afield in engagement, but I also think that it's the role of the corporate secretary to be the point person for that engagement, the more engagement that's happening now.
Well, let's talk about your organization, the Society. Obviously, throughout the year, is a group that brings all the corporate secretaries together, talks about their issues. You do this regionally, you have a big national conference. When you put your ear to the ground, okay, what worries the corporate secretaries today about board governance and board performance?
Confidentially, they wouldn't say this maybe to their boards, but they do worry, I think, about the board's engagement in the boardroom and their ability and desire to ask the tough questions of management. Every good corporate secretary wants their board members armed with information so that there'll be a robust discussion about an issue in the boardroom. We are responsible for orienting them We watch them in the boardroom to make sure they're understanding what's going on, particularly if it's a new director, particularly if it's a company that uses a bunch of acronyms or, has not been in the industry. We want to make sure they get it. We want to get them whatever information they need that they don't get, and we don't want them to be fearful to ask questions. No question is too big or too small. So I would say that's the biggest sort of thing we could fix or make better if we could.
What about, you used the word engage in the boardroom. What about the trends, all the trends engaging outside the boardroom, engaging with investors and shareholders? That is obviously a big issue, has been for the last 3 years. It's not going away.
Right.
Do corporate secretaries find that challenging right now?
Well, from a time management perspective, I think so. I will tell you, yes, definitely more engagement. I talked to one large investor this past week. They saw 10% of their engagements last year had included board members. This most recent year, 20%. So it doubled in a year. So is every board member engaging? No. Is every company having one board member that's engaging? No. Maybe it's 10, 20%. Maybe it's 10, 20% of the top of the Fortune 100. But when they're asked, you should take your board members, and whether that means take them somewhere or make the meeting at their place or do it on the phone, you should do it. And the corporate secretary is and should be the point person for that. I mean, in consultation with the GC. But typically, if they want to talk about compensation and it's CEO compensation, they don't want the CEO there. Right. They want the head of the comp committee there, and that makes sense. And maybe the HR head, But the corporate secretary is the person who facilitates that, acts as a chaperone, as you will, cruise director type of thing. I don't mean to diminish it with the cruise director, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, I certainly don't want you to leave here without me being able to ask this final question, and that is, I want to tap all those resources that you've had over the years of serving as corporate secretary and then heading up the society. So if you had to give one piece of advice to board members and to corporate secretaries, we'll do the board members first, about how they can make their board more effective, what piece of advice would you offer first to board members?
I tell them, use your corporate secretary in a new way that you've never thought of. Ask a question. If your corporate secretary and your GC are the same and you have a great relationship with your GC and you know what the GC does, look at your assistant secretary, the person who might be sitting in the back of the room but that knows a lot. These are great resources. They know what's going on at other companies. They know what shareholders want. They know what the minutes say. They're probably writing the minutes. Use them. As far as to the corporate secretaries, the best advice I would give, I mean, this is advice you give to lots of people, but it's basically no surprises. Your CEO doesn't want to be surprised in the boardroom. Your directors don't want to be surprised in the boardroom. Nobody wants to be surprised. And it goes to everything from what's on the agenda to what's for lunch. So be very good and don't surprise anyone.
Well, Darla, I can't tell you what a great job you're doing there over at the Society. It's always a pleasure when I'm involved in their activities, but we wish you good fortune and thank you for taking the time to join us on the show.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take a look at another critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, NASDAQ, the Center for Audit Quality, and PwC. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, R.R. Donnelly, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.